All right, and we're live.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Live Coding Happy Hour for June 9th, 2000 and... Oh, is this the thing I'm going to have trouble with? 17. God almighty. With me, as always, is my compatriot, Josh Nerius. Hello, Josh.
Hey, Dave.
And I'm Dave Slusher. We'll get into our longer intros a little bit later. This time, what we're going to do, Josh is going to work on hooking up the Google Realtime API so that you can have kind of a collaborative Google Docs type experience. And the fact that it's a Google Docs type experience is, in fact, critical to the use case of this whole thing, because the whole motivation of this is Josh and I are desperately trying to get a Google Doc out of our life. And so if we can make it work like that, we can make everybody who currently uses this Google Doc make it go away. And so Josh is putting in the time to make sure that that happens. So I'm extremely happy to see this going on this week. Okay. So tell us a little more about yourself, Josh.
The longer intro. Well, right now I can't remember. And no, I'm Josh Nerius. I'm a developer evangelist here at ServiceNow. It is Friday. It's been a long week. So we're doing some hairy stuff today, and it's already getting off to a good start. So I'm in the process of moving.
IT problems, man. Like I got dropped by Skype about 2 minutes before live. It's one of those days. So.
It is. Yeah, and so I'm in the process of actually boxing up and moving. So I've got some boxes behind me, and actually this is probably the last time you'll see this backdrop on Live Coding Happy Hour. But
And I'm Dave Slusher, also a developer evangelist. I work with Josh. We're both in the platform business unit at ServiceNow, developer.servicenow.com. I actually was not listening to your intro because I was looking at a thing that I wasn't sure if it was working right. There you go. That's pretty much all you need to know, other than that we're desperately publishing content as fast as we can over this last week. So if you, at the same YouTube channel where this lives, there's a lot of stuff that we're trying to get up. Here's what I'm drinking. Good gravy. And I had a foamy mess explosion happen like 2 seconds before you hit the live button. So I was popping that up. I almost, I'm changing laptops, and I almost foamed all over the old laptop. Like I came about a millimeter from doing that. So
they're going to get it back, and they're like, so that's why.
Something to do to IT when it comes to smelling like Sweetwater grass monkey. So what are you drinking
Grass
today?
monkey. So today I'm actually working on cleaning out my fridge. So I have another Poet Oatmeal Stout. It's made appearance on Live Coding Happy Hour before. So a little bit darker and delicious.
All right. Let us go straight into it at this point. So tell us a little bit about what you're hooking up, and what we get a little about the why, but just like tell us what you're doing and kind of the strategy and what we're going to be seeing through the rest of this while we get the screen share up and going.
Yep, sounds good. So let me first start to share my screen. And as I was going out there, I was trying to figure out ways, like Dave was saying, to approximate the Google Docs experience inside of ServiceNow. And so there are various libraries out there that I found, but the one that seemed most interesting, and the API that seemed most interesting, is the Google Realtime API, which is ultimately what Google uses behind the scenes to drive Google Docs. So it seemed, what's more appropriate if you're trying to do a Google Docs replacement than to use, the API that drives it. And Dave, are you able to see my screen? I just want to make sure.
Yes, I am.
All right, and I'm taking a look at the broadcasting side. It looks like that's over there, so we're good to go. So anyhow, I started taking a look at the Google Realtime API. This is not necessarily the only way you can do this, but this seems to be one of the better options that are out there. And basically what I want to walk through today is the process of trying to set this up in a ServiceNow instance, since obviously, it's kind of the first step is, can you get the basic examples working? And then I want to use this JavaScript editor called Quill. So Quill.js is a open source editor. And if you actually look at the homepage, it's got a nice example here. It's a rich, WYSIWYG text editor, and you've got the normal things that you would expect to have in an editor. And so the goal is to use the Realtime API in combination with Quill to do some of this collaborative stuff and have things happen in real time.
So we've actually got, in the degree of difficulty thing, we're actually hooking up two things simultaneously, or roughly simultaneously.
We are, yeah, hooking up two things simultaneously and doing it in ServiceNow at the same time. So, sort of accounting for any specific things we have to worry about there. So high risk, high reward, lots of possible things that could go wrong.
And don't forget, for those new to the live coding happy hour, never guaranteed to have working code. We'll do the best we can, but sometimes sometimes we surprise ourselves, and sometimes we just don't make it nearly as far as we go. And sometimes we end up down a blind alley or even a productive alley that wasn't where we intended.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just going to zoom this up here. Similar to what we did last time, I wanted to put a little bit of a roadmap out there of, what is it that I'm going to actually work through. So I spent some time reading the Realtime API docs so that we wouldn't have to, because that's a little bit boring. And the first thing that we have to do is we need to register an application on the Google side, because so the whole idea behind the Realtime API is that you've got multiple people in multiple locations interacting with it. And all of those interactions have to go through the API, which is ultimately hosted at Google. So like many Google things, we have to register it. And that's what I'm going to do now. So we're going to go to the Google API console in a new tab, and I'm going to create a new application. And I think it's important to show this because anytime you're out there using APIs, you're going to have to do something similar to this. So we're going to call this LCHH for June 9th. I'm surprised I actually remember the date. And then we'll switch over to it. Where'd it go?
Yeah, if you could do a plus on your screen.
Let me zoom that up a bit. How's that?
Yeah.
Okay, good deal. All right, so we've got our new application on the Google side called Live Coding Happy Hour June 9th. But that's not enough. We actually have to enable the API. Now, again, I read the docs. The API that we need to enable is the Google Drive API, because there is a little bit of data exchange, and that data actually goes through Google Drive. So we enable this, and then this is going to prompt us to say, hey, you need to use credentials for this. So let's create credentials to get started. And we tell it which API we're using. We're going to say we're using web browser because this is all going to be client side. And we're accessing user data. And that's an important distinction that we don't really have time to talk about now, but that's okay. Now, the next thing is we need to authorize the JavaScript origins, and this is going to be the instance. So I'm just going to copy the instance URL and then a redirect URL because there is an OAuth component that that is with this. Now, we're not really going to spend much time on OAuth. The code that we're using is pretty much handles all that for us, which is nice. So again, LCHH June 9th. And there we go. So ultimately, this is what we wanted. We wanted this client ID. I'm going to just copy that. I'm going to paste that into Evernote for future keeping. This by itself is not sensitive, so we are okay to have that on the screen, just in case anyone was wondering. So before we get into the next thing, any comments or questions so far? I just want to make sure that we don't. Sometimes I forget to look.
None through the YouTube chat so far.
Okay, just want to make sure there was nothing crazy like can't hear us or that kind of thing.
Andrew Barnes is calling us out for only doing 2 things. Apparently, that's not enough things for Andrew.
2 things. Well, we could. I don't know. Anyway, I got nothing for you, Andrew. Maybe we'll do.
We also want to convert it to Markdown and send that through a PDF processor and something else.
And then hook it up to Twilio's new fax API. How's that?
There you go.
So get some faxes involved. Makes everything better. So now that we did that, we want to load the real-time library. And I think there's an example. I'm going to go to the quick start, actually, because they've got some example code that we're going to use. So set up the example. And this is really, again, we've talked about this before, but always try to start with the example that they give you. And that's what I'm going to try today. But first, I need to create an app. So I'm going to create a...
Well, and even maybe like a step back from that is start with a working thing as simple as possible before you, particularly like, as we've noted, we got a couple degrees of difficulty here. So, this is very much like the continuous integration, right? You want to be changing a small bit of code rather than a large bit of code because you want to see something working before you go too crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in this case, we might be able to there's one step simpler. So there's this quick start where you can actually copy this into your browser. but it's not very different than the second example. The first example is a tiny bit simpler, but it's not meaningful for us. So I'm just going to basically skip that one in the interest of time. And so what we want to do, we got HTML, so we want to put this into a UI page. And we're going to make it a direct UI page just so that we're not pulling anything in. And I guess I'll just call this editor. All right, and then we'll paste that code. We'll make sure everything looks okay. We'll save it. And let's see what happens when we open it up. So we've got a Realtime Editor, and we get an error message saying invalid client ID. Did you forget to insert? And yes, I absolutely did forget to insert, although I kind of purposely did that so we'd see this error message. So we actually got the boilerplate code, but we need to go and we need to put this client ID into the UI page. Now, in theory, you'd want to put this somewhere else. You maybe would put this in a system property, but in the interest of time, we're just going to paste it right there. Okay, so now we've got that. We will refresh and see what happens. So now you'll notice we have this authorize button, and what's happened, so in this code, I'm not going to walk through every step, but they actually have done some things for us. So there's a real-time utils library that handles a lot of the setup of authorization. So, we've spent a lot of time on previous live coding happy hours setting up OAuth and that sort of thing. This is just done. It's all taken care of. So I'm going to log in as myself.
That's in the boilerplate code they gave you.
Yes, yeah, this is in the boilerplate code. So it's a thing of beauty that there's not much more to it than just this. The other thing to note is that this is all browser communicating with Google. The ServiceNow instance is not communicating with Google at this point, and that's part of why this is simpler. We're not in there defining applications in the OAuth registry and stuff like that. So that's part of why it's as simple as it is. So I'm going to go ahead and allow this. And there we go. So we've got this thing that says, welcome to the Quick Start app. But to show what this is actually doing, well, we need to do something else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this. I'm going to open it up in a new browser. And I could give Dave the link to this as well, but we can't see Dave's screen. So we're just going to use two browser windows. And what should happen in theory is as I type, it should go to the other one, and it does. So, right off the bat, this is kind of the quick start, up and running with not a lot of configuration, and we're doing already this Google Docs like thing, and it's not just appending, because if I come in here and I delete a word in the middle of it, the word goes away in the middle of the sentence on the other side. There's some fairly complex stuff that's going on, some interesting algorithms to make.
And just to understand this is a plain. So can you go back to the HTML of this thing in the UI page? Yeah.
Yep.
So that is a plain text box, right?
Yeah. So this is a text area, and what we're doing is there's this setup portion where what we're doing is we're actually creating this thing called a real-time file. And if I actually went to Google Drive right now, you'd see a thing out there called new quick start file. Mm-hmm. And then it initializes it. So we do this thing called model.getRoot, and we're actually getting this object out of this virtual real-time document, and then we're binding it to the text area down here.
Okay, so that's the key. That wire text box is the key thing, which is that's the thing that makes that text area a consumer of the real-time API sharing this.
Exactly. And the interesting thing about that is we could interact with the data in other ways. So it doesn't have to be wired to a text box. We could wire it to something else. We could listen to events and throw it into a read-only div somewhere else, or there are any number of things we could do with it.
Is there do you know if there is a specific Angular type binding to this?
I haven't actually gone digging for an Angular binding. It would surprise me if there was not.
If there was like an ng directive that was a ng real time, to make a thing be this, that would make a lot of sense, right? And then you just throw this in a service portal widget. Yeah,
that would be pretty awesome. And even if it doesn't exist, I think the process of setting it up probably wouldn't be terribly difficult. And because there are a series of event listeners and things like that, so there are different kinds of events you can listen for, and you could then wire that up to whatever you want to on the Angular side. So that part's all cool, but this isn't exactly that compelling. I mean, this isn't going to replace Google Docs. So that's where Quill comes in. So that's what I want to do next is I want to set up Quill. And
let's just note we're 15 minutes into the thing, of which 7 minutes was prelude, and you've got the real-time thing running, basically. Like the boilerplate basically is doing the very basics of what you needed to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And major props, of course, to Google for this. They don't pay us for anything that we're saying here today.
Right. We didn't, like, this is all Google, right? At this point, it's basically more or less copy and pasted Google code, right?
Yeah, exactly. And very, very easy to get started with. So on the Quill side, I'm just going to download, and this is going to give us a variety of CDN links. And kind of in the theme of what we were saying a minute ago, I want to start with the simplest thing. So I'm just going to create a new UI page called Quill. I don't want to try to link these things up yet because I honestly don't know what's going to happen. And I don't want to muddle the two. So we'll call this Quill. We'll also make that a direct UI page. And that's pretty interesting. This / CDN dot, there's no HTTP or HTTPS in front of it. I wonder, is that a thing? Let me throw some boilerplate in here. Just minimize that. Oh, no, there's the minimize button. There we go. So we've got that. Is there like a quick start? That's here we go. Quick start. So we're going to bring it in.
I wonder if they're doing the URLs like that so that they, that whether you're on SSL or not, you get whatever the protocol was.
Yeah, that's a possibility. I mean, I'm just going to try leaving it. Because if it works that way, that would be great. Because
right, I caused myself problems when I did my first service portal stuff using non-SSL links, and then I moved it up to my employee instance where it requires an SSL link.
Script. There we go. I think. Oh, there we go. There's an unclosed BR there, and I have to do that because the editor in ServiceNow is very sensitive to that. It has to be very syntactically correct stuff. All right. So we've got the boilerplate in there. We'll go ahead and fire this one up, and we'll see what happens. So again, I mean, we've done almost nothing, and here's a rich text editor. I can do, things you would want to do in an editor. I've got ordered lists. I've got unordered lists. I don't know what this one is. I guess that removes formatting. So there we have it. It's a very basest form. We have a thing working.
Okay, so we have the two things working independently.
Yep. So now the goal is going to be to connect these together. And because we want to say that when something happens in Quill, it's going to propagate to the Realtime API and vice versa. So if you've got two Realtime API clients, say you're working on a document and I'm working on a document, we have to react to the events and then update the Quill editor window accordingly. Now, I don't know if the approach that I'm going to take makes sense in the long term. There are different things you can do with the Realtime API, but for the purposes of today, the Realtime API functionality we're using it's this thing called a collaborative string. And really what a collaborative string is, it's kind of exactly what it sounds like. It's a string that you can collaborate on, but you could also have more complex data structures. So you could have an entire model that's not necessarily just a string. It could have attributes and sub attributes, objects, arrays, whatever.
It could be JSON, right?
It could be I think maybe some sort of JSON. I think you might have to do some work to go from JSON to the Realtime API model. Mm-hmm. But either way, I think you could use JSON as a base. And the reason I'm saying that and the reason that's important is because of how Quill actually stores information. So I want to actually show that now. Let's see, what's the easiest way to do this? I'm going to do this. I'm going to say console.log quill.get content. I think that's it. Let me just actually pull up the Quill documentation really quick. So we'll look at the content. Let's get contents plural. All right, let's do that. And I'll open up Developer Tools. And let's try refreshing this. So did it log my thing? You know what? Let's clear that, refresh again. Oh, you know what? I think this Developer Tools is attached to a different window. So let's open DevTools again. There we go. So the thing that's returned by Quill is this thing called Delta. And it has an object called ops or operations. And each of these operations...
Is there any way to blow that screen up? Because that's actually...
Yeah, let's see. There we go.
Excellent.
Move that up. There we go. Much better. So the contents, when you do get contents in Quill, it's this thing called a Delta object. And basically... the easiest way to put this is Quill has its own sort of serialization format that happens. So the data behind the scenes can be passed around and parsed in different ways. That's not necessarily dependent on HTML. So even though it's rendered as HTML, you could actually export it as HTML. There's a sort of this underlying structure that represents the document, and this lets us see it. So this is the thing that we have to be aware of as we're trying to serialize back and forth on the Realtime API. Because ultimately this is what we have to pass back and forth, not the raw HTML that we see here. So to compare that, if we inspect the element, we can see that this is just simple HTML, but the actual storage is not HTML. So I think the first thing, let me just look at. So we've got import. Okay, I don't have any roadmap for wiring Quill in the real-time example.
All right.
It's just do the thing. So we're going to do the thing. We're going to try to do the thing. So I think
you need to make. So essentially, you need to do that binding that you're doing with the Realtime API to the same element that Quill is bound to as well.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Or either that, or I need to figure out a way to say react to changes in Quill, and when things change in Quill, update, like a hidden input or something. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to get Quill onto the same UI page. So I just want to see if I can get it to render, and then I'll start trying to wire it up. So I've got the imports here, and now I want to get the editor boilerplate code. So I'll copy that over. And I think we can put this at the bottom. Actually, no, we don't want to put that at the bottom because we might run into issues later, because we probably want the editor to load before we're trying to load data from Google.
Okay.
So we'll save this, and we'll at least see if it actually shows up. I need to close that. Let's go back to the Realtime Editor UI page. So here we go. We've got our editor. It's actually rendering. It looks like, yep, there's the Realtime. Here's the quick start stuff. And that's all rendering. And,
okay. So you've got the two things coinciding in the same page. Both are working. So they're not conflicting. Right? Is that where we're at?
Yep, that is where we're at. Yeah, so they're working, they're not conflicting,
but they're also not touching.
They're not talking to each other. Yeah.
Okay.
So what I want to do on the Quill side, I think I need to look for events, because I need to find an event that says when this thing changes, update this, and then at some point I'm gonna have to go the other direction as well. So let me just look for events.
I'm looking at this now.
So here's an event called text change. So emitted when the contents of Quill have changed. Details of the change, representation of the editor content. This looks like what we want. So, and here it is. So Quill.onTextChange, change, so on and so forth. This is kind of cool too. It looks like there's the delta, which is the object that we looked at a minute ago. There's the original, so the old delta, and then the source. So we can actually tell if it was a user or if it was the API, which I guess could actually be pretty helpful if we wanted to do something only when a user typed something in versus when maybe an API made a change. And the reason I think that's important is because say we load this up and Realtime API pulls data in and then injects data into this editor. We need to be able to figure out that it was injected into the editor and not try to send it back. So I think there's like some bubbling that might happen if we're not careful. So I'm just going to put this in. Let's see. Here's where we initialize the Quill editor. So I guess right after this would be the place to do that. I'll copy that in. Quill.onTextChange. And I'm just going to save that, and we're going to see what we get in the console. And again, we'll open Developer Tools. And clear that out and reload. And thus, it seems like there's a little bit of a delay. So, it is bringing the data back, but it takes a second or two. So they're long term probably need to add a spinner or something like that. So now we'll actually trigger a change. So test 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. We'll take a look at this side, and there we go. So a user triggered this change. We can see that those messages are getting logged every time I click a button. So we're at least figuring that out. The next thing we want to do is, I think we realistically want to start taking that backend representation of this and pushing it into the input. So what I think I can do is say var content equals quill.get contents. My indentation is all off here, and it's throwing my OCD crazy. But
do you want this in your handler or not in your handler?
You're absolutely right. I do want this in the handler because, yeah, we need to do it when it actually happens. So we're going to get the contents. You know what? Actually, we probably don't even need to get the contents because we have that in the Delta. So what I'm going to do, at least I think that's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to say document.get element by ID and text area 1. And that's one of those input boxes. And we're going to say dot value equals JSON.parse, no, stringify, delta. And we'll just see what happens. So reload. And type something. Oh, there we go. So, that's interesting. So the delta is not actually enough. Because you'll notice as I type, we see.
So it's interesting watching the data structure. Backspace a few times. I want to see that. Oh, that's super good. So not usable, but cool, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The fact that information is there. I mean, you could do all sorts of interesting stuff with that. So that's pretty cool, but not what we want.
That does tell us the format of the delta, but it's not doing what we thought we were doing.
Yeah, we want the entire content, not just the thing that changed.
Okay, so your original impulse was correct.
It was. Yep. So I'm going to take this. I'm just going to get rid of this console.log because we've already seen that.
And again, do you want that in the handler or not in the handler?
Yeah, we want this in the handler. So we're going to say var contents equals quill.get contents. And then I think we can just store the contents directly. So we'll just try this. Save that. And reload. And let's see what happens. There we go. So that's looking better. So for everything we do, this is creating these insert statements, which is kind of interesting. If we put in ordered list. So yeah, so we can see it building out the whole structure.
Hold on a second. So what you've got there? So that's the contents element that we're stringifying, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the contents element is actually like I don't know what you call it. It's like an edit decision list, right?
Essentially, yeah. I think that's probably about right.
So basically, like if you were going to hit a Control Z, you're going to take off that last insert, basically.
It does, but it's not a log. It seems to always be the current state of the document. So
but I'm saying like the rendered text is actually like starting at that beginning and walking forward, almost. You know what I'm
saying? I think so.
So if you backspace something, like backspace over element 2, that's going to add to that list, right?
So it does not. It actually just updates it.
Oh, updates that last thing. Okay.
Yeah. So this appears to be that this is always a representation of the current state of the document. So yeah, it looks like as you delete stuff, things actually go away. And which is interesting because going back to the whole thing about HTML earlier, what this means is that you could have a representation of the document and then render it in different ways. You could have this be markdown, or you could have it. I think there are different things that you could do with it that would be pretty interesting. So the problem though that you'll note is that when I'm making changes down here, it's not making changes up here. And if I were to, let me just copy this and put this into a new window. All right, let's do that. So again, element 2, it's making changes here. It's not propagating. So something about the fact that we're programmatically setting this is not triggering the event that actually causes the stuff to happen, the magic to happen with the Realtime API. Now,
so it's updating the box, but it's not saving back to Google. So like your Google Drive docs is going to be welcome to the Quick Start app test 1 2 3 4 5.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, because this is basically bound to the same data, we can tell they're definitely not in sync. Now I can try tweaking this. So if I press a button over here, now it shows up on the right side. Now it shows up over here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure what's up with that. But before I try to figure out what's up with that, I at least know. So I do another element. I just type a space here, and then it propagates. So it's a hack right now. But as long as we can figure out how to trigger that event, which is probably not going to be terribly difficult, we'll be able to push it over. But the thing I'm more interested in right now is actually the other way around, because here's the problem. If I reload this, you'll see that the data structure is there, but we're actually not loading this data structure into
Quill.
Right. So that's the next thing that I think I'm going to try to tackle. Because more than anything, we need that. We need the data there. So there's a method on the Google Realtime side. So let's take a look at that again, where we are initializing the document. So on file initialize, we are getting, so that's on an initialize, but we want on file load because we already have a file. So we're getting the contents of this thing called demo string. We should probably call that something else sometime. And then we're wiring it up to these text areas. What I think that means we can do, though, is we should be able to, in this wire text boxes function, do something with the data. So if I do this, actually, let me just try that. Console.log collaborative string. That's a long and unwieldy thing to type. And we'll take a look at developer tools again. Oops, it went away. There we go. Here's the object. That should be the object. So there's the ID, the length, the text. So collaborative text string dot text is the actual thing here. And so then I just need to take this and pass it into the editor. And so I'm guessing that's going to be set contents. But again, I'm just going to take a look at the documentation real quick. Content.
Yeah, I do see set contents.
Set contents. There we go.
Yeah.
So set contents, and this is going to be, it says it's a delta. So, okay, so it's a delta, but the thing that we have right now, the results of get contents is not a delta. It's a retrieves content represented by a delta. Oh, maybe it is a delta.
Let's just, as first cut, let's just try pumping the same thing back in. See what happens.
Yeah, that works. Yeah, I'll just drop it right in. And it should be an object, so I'm going to parse it. So we'll go down here. We'll say, now this is the big question. Quill, yeah, so Quill should be available in scope. So we'll say Quill dot set contents collaborative JSON.parse collaborative text or collaborative string dot text, because collaborative string is not a string, it's an object that has a thing called text that is a string. And we'll see what happens. Ho, so it did it. So it took that. Nice. So again, this is going too smoothly. For those of you new to live coding happy hour, we usually have more challenges by now, but that's okay. I think we still have plenty of things to figure out. So we're doing that, and if I go over here,
well, here's the big challenge, right? Is so the only reason that that's saved to Google Drive is because you went in and touched the text box.
Yeah.
Right. So if you added element 4, it's not going to save right now.
Correct. Yeah. And well, so actually, that's an interesting point. There are two problems right now. So the first problem is that, so if I add element 4, it doesn't save, but I can touch it and then it saves. And that comes over here. But notice that nothing happened to the actual thing because we're doing it on load, but we're actually not doing it when this changes.
Okay.
So that's the next thing. Lots of wiring. So I guess we have to wire that up. So that's going to happen. Let me think about this.
This is going to be in your your Google Realtime API. Here's actually, there's a significant problem right here, which is you're responding to events in two different APIs. So which API are you in at any given point is a non-trivial cognitive challenge, right?
Yeah, that is a problem. And I think one of the things that, so in reading some of the API docs, I think what we want to try to focus on is responding to events thrown by the Realtime API, not trying to respond to the input box. Because, I mean, eventually, I don't know how to do this. I haven't read enough for the documentation, but I would like to get rid of these text areas completely and just have it wired up to this. So, so I know that there are events thrown by the Realtime API, and that I think is what we need. Is there some way?
So 2 comments that have come in. Well, Andrew Barnes says Delta on first load should be entire. Might run into issues the second time you load contents, but not the first. Yeah, I think that's true. He's saying that the Delta object will contain everything the first time you load it.
Yes.
And then Kevin is asking, can you run log statements to find out which one you're working in? I mean, that's not. It's really just a develop time thing, which is which event am I responding to? Is it a Google event or is it a Quill event, or is it a browser input event? I guess it's really the.
Well, and we know all those events are going to happen. I think it's also deciding which one we should be listening to. And because I think a perfect example of this is the fact that, when I'm doing stuff here, this is happening instantaneously, but I'm probably not wired up to the right thing. Like maybe when this happens here, I shouldn't be setting the text box. I should be setting something on the Realtime API and letting that propagate to the text box or something like that.
Right.
So the good news is for figuring out when text was inserted down here.
Well, that's an interesting. What if the next thing you did was just take the same thing that the text box is responding to and move it down to the bottom text box? You know what I'm saying? So the or really and truly what the rightmost text box is responding to. so that in the on-change handler of Quill, that's when you're doing your real-time API push.
That's a possibility. I think. So the trouble is. Oh, you know what? I think something you just said for some reason kind of jogged an idea, and that is that. So let's just take a look again at the code, and let's go down to. So we're doing our quill.set contents on wire. What am I looking for? I'm looking for the Quill code. So in the quill.onChange, I'm doing this thing for get element by ID text area value.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is wrong. I think this is the problem. I think this is where I need to be talking to the Realtime API and then letting it handle, because the Realtime API is already bound to the text box. Right. So if I can figure out a way to update that string, then in theory I should be able to interact with everything. So let me just do that. Let me try that. So if I comment that out, what I would want to do here is I need to get a reference to this collaborative string, and let me find out where we're actually defining that. So it's in the on file load. Just to make this easier, I'm going to take out the var, and I'm going to combine these two scripts. I'm going to define the collaborative string up here. Again, don't know if this is the best way to do it, but right now I just need to get it in scope so we can play around with it. So now that we've done that, if I say collaborative string dot text equals contents, or JSON.stringify contents, now I'm not actually talking to the box at all. And yeah, so the more I think about this, the more I think this might be the right thing, because say you had other elements that were listening to this, you wouldn't want to have to go and manually update all of those. Mm-hmm. So let's see what happens. Collaborative string dot text.
And this is one of those things where the console is going to be especially important, because you don't really know.
I have no idea what's happening at all. So actually, there is we'll take a look at this in a minute. I was reading about debugging the Realtime API, and there are some cool ways to debug it. So
let me clear your console log right now before you do anything else.
Yes.
Just so we know the new stuff.
Fresh and clean, and make that a little bigger.
We're really
oh my goodness. It's working.
Holy cow.
It's going to both sides. So let's pull up this one and reload it. I, again, did not expect it to work like that. Let me just, there we go. Yeah, see, it's working over in the other window too. So, woohoo. So let's take a pause, and I'm going to take a drink because I feel like I deserve one.
You absolutely do deserve one.
or more likely, I need one. And there we go. Now my voice is almost back. So I think the final thing that we need, so this is propagating. What's not happening is, as those things are happening, we're not updating on the other side. On the originating side, it doesn't matter because this is where it's originating from, but we need to be able to take it from the Realtime API code and actually get it into here, into the editor on the other side. So that is where, let's go back. I was starting to look at this. There's this thing for connecting listeners for model events, and this model event called text inserted is, I believe, the event that we want. And so what they're doing here is they're saying in the onFile loaded, we're going to actually add this event listener, and then we're going to call this onString changed. So I'm just going to do that and see what it's throwing, so we can see what we can get our hands on. So there's onFile loaded. We'll add the add event listener. We'll take the onString change and we'll just copy that as well. We'll just throw that here. Man, I got to put this into an editor after we're done and clean it all up. Eek. Ah. All right, I'm going to stop fighting it. I promise. So we'll save that. And again, we're going to look at the logs. And this time, what I want to do is I want to look at it on the target side because this is where I'm most interested in seeing the information. So I'm going to open up a developer tools here. And clear all that crap out and reload. So this, oh, that was weird. Huh. There's some weird stuff going on, but we'll figure that out. And I'm not actually seeing anything happening on this side. This is element 7. Yeah, none of that actually went over. Let me just refresh this. Maybe it's not all there. Yeah, something seems to have stopped working. Let's reload that again. Yeah, there's some general weirdness since I added that listener code. So let me take that out. So text the add event listener, GPI add drive to real-time event. All right, let's just take it out. Hopefully it's not a caching issue. Well, I can't imagine that would be it. Oh, you know what? I took the whole thing out. I threw it all away. I need those first two things. There we go. It's like now we're live coding. Refresh. Okay, so at least it's coming back. And now we're back to, we're successfully inserting into the first thing. Is it going into both? Yeah, it's going into both. And it's coming over here. Actually, I need to reload the right side as well. And let's just verify. This is 10. Okay, it's going to both places. So something about wiring up this event it doesn't like at all. So text, oh, that's why. Because text is not the thing. The thing is collaborative string. So that was just throwing an error and probably causing the code to bomb out entirely. Will it hurt? Yeah, it will hurt if I rename that because it's currently a variable global to the scope. So I'm just going to do that and let the code wrap and refresh and refresh and developer tools. This is 11. And if we look at the developer tools, okay, there we go. So there's the text inserted event coming through. So that's pretty cool. We can see that each time. If we look at it, there's this thing called current target. And current target has the basically what the event came from, and it has text. And you'll notice that this text is the contents of
It's the whole contents.
Yeah, the whole contents. So my theory would be that we can take
current target dot text in that handler, right?
Yeah, throw that in the handler, and I think that will do it. He said, so let's see that. Well, we'll find out. So at this point, we should still have Quill. So we'll do Quill dot. Well, let me do this. Var JSON.parse evt dot current target dot text. And then we'll do quill.set contents obj and see what happens. Reload. Reload.
Now, just for my understanding, we're so you're responding to that's responding to the Google Realtime API text change, right? What's that going to do? And both of those bottom text boxes are now subscribed to that, right?
Yes.
What's going to happen when you make your own change? Right. So let's go ahead and do. So you're going to add a 12. Both of these guys are listening to the listener, but now you've got the text box in which you're editing is also subscribed to that change listener, right?
Yeah. Well, it's doing something weird. So every time I type, I lose focus. It's going over right away, but the editor appears to lose focus as soon as I do that. So I don't know if that's, let me see if I can pull up the developer tools. API call triggered this change. Yeah, that's a really interesting question because I almost feel like there's some kind of like bubbling, looping.
There almost certainly is, because you type a key press.
Yep.
Your key press generates an on change event. The on change event pushes to Google Realtime API. Your text box is subscribed to changes from Google Realtime API. So, kind of what I honestly thought you were going to see the change twice. I thought you were going to see a double character, kind of like the old modem days, whether you're half duplex or full duplex.
Yeah. So here's the interesting thing about that is, so I think part of that is handled by Google. Part of that's in the API, and that goes back to, I know there's a thing in here that talks about event handling and basically how bubbling happens. And so there's like this anti-bubbling code that says if an event is triggered by an event, basically if an event is triggered by itself, then it's going to stop propagation. The problem is that we're crossing boundaries, and so Quill still doesn't know about that. Because if I come up here,
what Andrew is saying in the chat is that you're redrawing the whole editor from the listener, and is losing focus because of that.
Yeah.
So I wonder if it's as simple as just taking your target and doing and forcing focus back to it.
That's possible. We can try.
Handler.
So let me see if I can do that. Can I do a Quill JS editor loses focus? That's interesting. Editor loses focus when forward deleting text. Let's do. Actually, let me do this. Is there a focus method here? Editor focus. Aha. Quill focus. So let's go. To the set content and Quill.focus. What I'm curious to see is if focus will be at the right place. So if I'm typing on a line, will it go? And this still feels really janky to me. Like, I don't know. I don't like it, but no, it's not. Because the problem is, here's the issue, is that you know what? We need to do it in two places. Because the thing that's focusing now is the target. Because this code is getting called, the set content. So I guess what I need to do is I need to say in the Quill.onChange after this, I also need to focus it. Again, feels really weird to me.
I'm going to admit to you having just got lost by this one.
Let's try again. So refresh both sides. Let's do another element. This, now. Well, the good news is we can type one letter at a time. And
so are you actually losing complete focus from that text area every letter you type?
Yeah, every time I type, I have to re-click and before I can type again. It's like the cursor goes away. So I think that this is just there's probably a flag or something in the event that I have to call that says, prevent defaults or cancel. There's something for like canceling propagation of events or something like that that I can probably do. The thing, though, is, I don't want to get too wrapped up on this because there's a lot of bigger stuff happening and it's happening successfully.
Right.
Which is that I'm actually able to take code and, type on one side, and you can see that, even stuff in the middle, if I take out a big, block of stuff, it's going away. It's doing the diffing, it's doing all of the stuff to actually determine the differences between these documents, and it's applying it to the other side.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I thought this is way farther than I thought would have happened in this session.
Yeah, I'm with you. I didn't think it was going to go that far.
Take a middle thing, double click like this is 6 or something like that, and then just bold that. Is that formatting going to move across?
Yep, it does.
I'll be damned.
So we can bold it. We can do underline.
Because that's part of that JSON, like in your JSON Delta doc, the underlining of that is one of your bottommost operation is now the underlining of that, right? If you Control Z, that's the thing you're undoing. Exactly.
Yeah. So if we look at this, for example, we've got insert hello world and then attributes header 1, and so it appears to be building that thing on the fly, propagating the cross. And so the other thing, I think I mentioned this a little bit. Yeah, I did mention this a little bit earlier, is that this is just a simple string. What I want to look into is if I can actually, instead of just treating this as a string, because we've got this underlying object structure, it may be possible to do the collaboration, do the real-time stuff on this structure instead of a string, which means we're getting out of this, parsing and serializing and deserializing, and might make things a little bit cleaner.
So you would tell Google this JSON is what we're sharing.
Yep.
Instead of the string is what we're sharing, which involves parsing and reparsing every time it goes in and out.
Yeah, and then what would be, and I think that might even take care of some of our issues, which are at that point when changes happen in the editor, we detect that, we tell Google about that, Google propagates that across, but we're not doing this intermediary, text area thing, which ultimately I think is what's causing our problems. So, overall, just taking a look at the time, I think
I think it is time to wrap it up. It's I think victory. Declare victory.
I do declare victory. Yes, might only be one character at a time, but we can do multiple characters up here, so we know the thing works, and it's just a matter of getting the focus thing figured out. So, and you know what? That also could just be a Quill.js thing. This might have nothing to do with anything we're doing. I saw that when I did that Google for the Quill.js focus thing, it appears to be an issue with other stuff like people that are doing React and other things. So this might just be a Quill bug.
Cool.
So let me go ahead and get back to Skype and unshare and figure out how to turn on my video without hanging up again. As always. All right, I'm on video. And there you are.
All right. So no, that was super fun. So now at this point, we're kind of at the we're getting close to the point where you could have, say, a UI page that does exactly the thing that we're doing, which is a Google Doc emulator. So I guess the next level of this is somewhere in here. You got to persist it to the ServiceNow data structure, which is not happening right now.
Correct. And yeah, so what I was thinking with that is that, maybe there's some kind of annotation that I could put in to say, put this on a description box. And when you click this button, it's like edit collaboratively, and it would pop up the collaborative editing environment. And then when you close that, it would put it back into the ServiceNow form or something. So
right. Or it could even be as janky as a save button, right?
Yeah.
Which is that you're editing, but you're not saving it back to ServiceNow until you hit that save button.
Yeah. The other thing we didn't talk about too much is that because this is going through Google Drive, this does require Google accounts. So we're not using Google Docs anymore. We're getting closer to using the platform. But if you wanted to go and do something, you do have to be aware of the fact that you still have to have a Google account for all of the users that are interacting with it.
All right. I think we're about to have a special guest. It is time to wrap it up.
Sounds good.
Hi.
Hello.
Okay. All right. So what's your rating on your oatmeal porter?
The porter or the stout is always a solid 4 for me. The poet is delicious. How's the grass monkey?
I'm going to say 3.75.
That works.
All right. And with that, thank you, Josh. Very successful, very good effort today. And we're going to wrap it up there.
On that note,
all right.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you very much. All right. Talk to you. We're not going to be around next week, so it'll be 2 weeks from that.
Sounds like a plan.
All right. Bye,
Thanks for
everyone.
watching.